Whichever way works.
All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. People still may trickle in, but we have the front row reserved for those who trickle in. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Elizabeth King. I'm the director of the Center for Russian, East European, Eurasian Studies here at University of Michigan. I'm very excited to have you all here. Thank you for coming to our last Kreis Noon lecture of this academic year. Thank you, despite the nice weather, we still have a great turnout, so thank you for taking some time out of your day to participate and to learn a lot during our last Kreis Noon lecture. I want to thank the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies for co-hosting the event today. And I also want to thank the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies and the Department of Musicology for co-sponsoring the talk titled Not Warsaw, Jews and Culture in the Cities of Polish Lands. It's my honor and I'm very excited to introduce you all to Dr. Halina Goldberg, who's a professor of musicology and director of the Robert F. Burns Russian and East European Institute in the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. Dr. Goldberg's interests focus on the interconnected Polish and Jewish cultures. Much of her work is interdisciplinary, engaging the areas of cultural studies, music and politics, performance practice, and reception, with special focus on 19th and 20th century Poland and Eastern Europe, Chopin, and Jewish studies. Dr. Goldberg is the author of Music in Chopin's Warsaw, editor of a special issue of the Music Quarterly titled Jewish Spirituality, Modernity, and Historicism in the long 19th century, New Musical Perspectives. And she's the director of the digital project Jewish Life in Interwar Łódź. In this talk, Dr. Goldberg will present her newest book, which she co-edited with Nancy Sinkoff, titled Polish Jewish Culture Beyond the Capital, Centering the Periphery. Also, just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to Dr. Goldberg for her talk, is that at the end we'll have time for Q&A, and I just ask if you want to ask a question, please briefly state your name and your affiliation before you ask the question, and also make note that in addition to some flyers about upcoming events, there's also a flyer for a coupon for 30% off, which is a great deal for ordering the book that Dr. Goldberg will talk about today. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and I would like to thank the Center for Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies, the School of Music, Theatre and Dance International Institute, Copernicus Center for Polish Studies, Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, Frankel Center for Judaic Studies for co-sponsoring my talk. And that list kind of attests to the nature of this book. I hope that I will make that point later. I am especially grateful to Geneviève Zubrzycki for starting the process of inviting me here, and Elizabeth King and Liz Malinkin for coordinating the visit. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here, and thank you for taking the time during a really busy time of the semester to join me here today. I left the name of Nancy Sinkoff on this slide because this is really a joint effort. We worked very hard on this book together, but it's also the expertise of somebody coming from the perspective of a historian and somebody who works in Polish cultural studies that allowed this particular profile of the book to emerge, and I will talk a little bit more about it during the course of my talk. This is not going to be a paper. I'm not going to read a paper. I treat it as a book talk, so I will try to speak as coherently as possible. There are, of course, 12 other people involved in that, and these are the authors of our chapters, and I will do my best to do justice to their scholarship, although since these are not necessarily the areas that I have the kind of depth they have, I hope that you will be encouraged to read their chapters and reach out to for their broader scholarship on these topics, because most of these people have written other works on these topics. So in spite of what the proverb says, I invite you to please judge our book by the cover. It was selected, of course, for its attractiveness. I love this image, but it's more than that. The Art Deco style of this image was particularly suitable for a book that dealt with urban cultural life, especially focused on the 1920s and 1930s, so signaling a particular period in time. The image also has a specific connection to the themes that resonate throughout our book, especially the urban experience and the meeting of tradition and modernity, and I hope I will make it clear in a moment. And it captures the textured richness of the contributions Jewish artists made to the cultural landscape and soundscape of Poland. So we capture some of that in the dedication of our book to the Jewish artists, writers and poets, musicians, theater and cabaret performers, architects, filmmakers and moviegoers, patrons of the arts, teachers and journalists, and communal and youth movement activists of Polish lands. We stand on your shoulders. The image of our book came from an actual sheet music cover from the 1930s. This is a sentimental tango that was premiered at the review Yo-Yo at Morskie Oko, CI, Cabaret Theater in Warsaw. And the artists that are associated with this book cover are Lon Heifetz, a graphic artist whose work appears mostly on book covers, and it's really stunning, from modernist to folkloristic to this kind of Art Deco images. Zygmunt Białostocki, a composer who, lyricist who was responsible for dozens, if not hundreds, of texts, well known throughout Białostocki is the composer, Włast is the lyricist. Włast's lyrics are counted at 2,000 plus, and some of the most famous popular songs of the period were written by Włast. He was also the publisher of the song and the founder of the Morskie Oko Theater, but he also worked as a director in other review theaters. Białostocki was the composer, known for hundreds of his songs, some of them very, very popular, but also wrote music for the movies, and was a music director in a number of theaters, not just in Warsaw, but also in other cities, including Łódź. And then Dora Kalinówna and Zofia Terneb, both actors, singers, who were known for their recordings, but also who were very prominent in interwar theater and in the movies, very much beloved by their audiences. All of these artists were associated with this song. So by taking this image from this particular sheet music publication, we were also symbolically addressing the fact that the music had contributions from so many Polish Jewish musicians, lyricists, administrators, leaders of artistic institutions and performers. And we have documentation of that performance associated with that with the song. This is actually a photograph representing Dora Kalinovna during the premiere performance of the song. The song is titled Rebecca. The song itself also has a meaning for our book, because this is a song that talks about modern love from the perspective of a traditional Jewish girl. She is yearning for a young man, a modern young man in a car to come and sweep her off her feet and marry her and take her into the new modern world. And this image is also very interesting because it shows the staging of the performance of the song was in Kazimierz Dolny, a small town in southeast Poland, not far from Lublin, if that helps you with the location. That was, at the time, during the interwar period, was a fascinating meeting place of the artistic crowd. This was a kind of an artist colony on the one hand. It was also a favorite tourist destination for bon vivants who wanted to take in the history and the landscape and the artsy atmosphere. At the same time, it was a home to very large Jewish population, for the most part very traditional, very impoverished. So you have these two worlds kind of coming together, and this is the very well known and very well preserved till today Renaissance market square of Kazimierz, where she's singing. So the song kind of embodies all of the topics that we were trying to address in the book. Let me give you a little excerpt from a period performance. The same year that the song was premiered, it became an instant hit. And the same year, Zofia Turner recorded a version of the song, but they are from the interwar period. They are perhaps, I'm thinking maybe a dozen different performances, not different recordings, but different performances, including several male performers who adopted the song with an appropriate gender text, singing about her rather than about the self. Notice the music, because the music also demonstrates the meeting of the two worlds. According to some scholars, this was a well-known Hasidic song that was now adopted as a tango. So let me play a little bit of that for you.
O mój wymarzony, o mój wytęskniony, nie wiesz o tym przecież ty, że w małym miasteczku za tobą ktoś wypłakał z oczu łzy, że biedna Rebeka w zamyśleniu czeka, aż przyjedziesz po nią sam i zabierzesz ją jako żonę swą hen do pałacu bram. Ten krzyk, ten gwałt, ten cud ja sobie wyobrażam, Boże mój. Na rynku cały lud, a na mnie błyszczy biały, weselny strój. O mój wymarzony, o mój wytęskniony, czy ktoś kocha cię jak ja? Lecz ja jestem biedna i to mój sen, co całe życie trwa.
So I saw many of you kind of bobbing to the song. I assume that you have heard it before. It continues to be one of beloved, repeated, reimagined songs of the interwar period. And I just wanted to play for you one of the recent renditions, which kind of infuses it with kind of Latin swing. So.
Come io sospiro, come io ammiro tutte nei magazzini. che enci orbeto provia charm sencese floros mio che povera Rebecca rememoro in vecas kai attendas kiam so.
So back to the artists. You probably noticed that all of what I'm discussing here was happening in Warsaw, and yet my hashtag says not Warsaw. But notice where they were all coming from. And not only were they born in the cities that are listed here, Białystok, Łódź, and Rivne, today's Rivne in Ukraine, but also they were educated there, so suffused with the local particular cultures, but also they were active in these other centers. Just to give you an example, Zofia Turner was in the conservatory in Lvov, or today's Lviv, and she was studying with some of the leading musicians there. She was studying to be actually an opera singer. She was evidently very, very tiny. So that kind of pushed her in another direction, her career, and she had an amazing career. She makes, even in the interviews that we have of her, she makes jokes about the fact that she was very short. So, but this is, there are a number of things that are happening when you think about it. You have the periphery nourishing the center with this talent that is educated and infused with particular kinds of creativity in these other cities moving to Warsaw. But more than that, there is very often and continuing dialogue between the periphery and the capital. That comes, for example, in artists traveling back and forth and changing jobs. And for example, I mentioned that sometimes they moved on and took jobs and stayed a number of years in one of the other cities and then returned to Warsaw. So there's a continuous dialogue. But of course, you also see the pull of the metropolis, of the capital. And I think that's something we will be seeing also in these chapters, in what way artists kind of gave into that pull, on the other hand, in how they resisted. So this is something to just kind of keep in mind. I will finally move beyond the cover, but the cover is very important, as was the meeting between me and Nancy. We met at a conference. Nancy actually collaborated with another musicologist, Rebecca Tsipes, on a book on 18th century Berlin milieu, and gave a fantastic topic. So I walked up to her, invited her for a drink, and then we spent 3 hours on a very, very fruitful conversation over very, very skimpy hotel drinks, and we came up with kind of these ideas. We immediately thought that so much of the conversation about Jewish creativity in Poland is centered on the shtetl, and we wanted to move beyond the shtetl, beyond the countryside, beyond folklore. We also realized, as we were talking about what is the kind of the scholarly focus of urban Jewish experience, we realized that this is very much Warsaw. That this, the experience of Polish Jews in the city is seen very much through the prism of the capital city. And it was very important for us to find a way to talk about the experience in other big cities, because each one of those cities had a different personality. Just to give you an example, Vilnius intelligentsia expressed themselves in Yiddish. So you have high culture in Yiddish. Kraków, Jewish intelligentsia, was Polish speaking. So right away you have a completely different framework. Łódź was a brand new kind of American style industrial city that grew out of nowhere, and with ginormous working class, factory working class populations, including factory workers, Jewish factory workers, although they tended to work in the smaller factories for reasons I can elaborate later. And so each one of those cities had a different experience linguistically in terms of what were their orientations towards centers. Warsaw was not the only center. There were also centers outside of Poland that were important to these artists. So our historiographic approach was centered on specific goals. We wanted to resist these still dominant modes of discourse by choosing a different geographic, chronological, and topical angles. Chronologically, we focused on the period from the late 19th century until the outbreak of the Second World War, and we very deliberately avoided focusing on the Holocaust. We all know what happened, and even if you look at the dates of those artists, you immediately think, but we know it. They didn't know it. We were trying to capture the experience in the moment without projecting to what we know the fate of these artists and their audiences was. We wanted to underscore the creativity of Jews in the Second Polish Republic. So we wanted to focus on a variety of activities, literature, film, cabaret, theater, architecture, the fine arts, music, but we also wanted to highlight the audiences, not just the creators, but the experiences of the audiences of consumption of art as well. And in addition to emphasizing the big cities outside of Warsaw, we were also interested in the smaller cities such as Lublin or Kazimierz Dolny. They also resonate in dialogue with their own local metropoles. So the importance of periphery became kind of central to the book, and of course it's there in the title. The most obvious relationship, the most obvious binary, is the relationship between the capital and the other big cities. And we saw it already in that song and the book cover image. But there are other center-periphery binaries. For example, urban hubs versus the surrounding areas and the smaller cities in the particular provinces. Städtle's as centers. For example, for Hasidic dynasty, it was the town of their tzaddik that was a center. So their concept of how the world was organized was very different. We're thinking about East versus West, the relationship of, for example, Łódź and Berlin. Which one of them is a center? The kind of natural thing is, oh yeah, Berlin is the center, which is not, but you will see that this was not always true in particular cases. The other questions of center and periphery had to do, for example, with gender. When you think about culture that centers the male creativity and the male experience, and women existed on the periphery or exist in the literature, in the scholarship on the periphery. And part of our goal was also to center women in that particular, so have her story, not just his story, as of the particular art and artistic experiences that we were studying. In the process of working out the kind of larger conceptual framework, we became very much aware how useful the concept of Polish lands was to us in the first place, we were thinking about borders and, are we in Poland or are we in Ukraine? And realized that thinking beyond the borders, especially today borders, or trying to constantly track down what was the border in a given moment because they keep shifting, it allowed us to think across the borders, the state borders. It allows us to focus on local activities, but also on local identities, which we realized were incredibly important to many of these artists and audiences, and identities that were not just linguistic, ethnic, or religious. They were regional identities that became really important in our narratives, and what we were seeing there to those artists. And it also allowed for a Jewish rootedness in the lands that were their homes for hundreds of years. So it was a different way of thinking about belonging as well. And some of the essays, I will try to highlight, some of the essays beautifully explore these topics. Another point that became very important to us was that the Jewish artists of the time were very much, for the most part, focused on the experience of what the Yiddish word encapsulates, Yiddish language encapsulates in the word doikait, the hearedness, the rootedness in a place in which the people lived. In the end, our book presents Polish Jews that were of Poland in a very organic way. So this is the table of contents for our book, and you can see that we divided the chapters into 3 groups, although, in some ways, I would say that because these topics are so central to many of the chapters, that I could imagine different configurations, and we played with different configurations, still with the same headings. So the topics of tradition and rebellion appear in many of the chapters. The interactions between performers or artists and their audiences, and then the idea of maps and spaces. These 3 chapters are particularly connected to spaces. For example, mapping modern Jewish Kraków, Eugenia Prokop-Janiec's chapter actually tells the story through maps. She maps the activities of Polish-speaking educated Jewish women in various institutions of learning, from schools, through libraries, through the offices of important journals and newspapers and book publications. I mean, her article is fascinating. She actually documents this. The maps are in 3 moments: 1899, 1919, and 1939. So these are you can immediately see that these are really important moments at the threshold of the 20th century, at the end of World War I, and just at the threshold of World War II. And she is able to document how the outburst of educational activity when women were allowed access to secondary education, and she has statistics and numbers, and they are just really, really fascinating. For example, by the time we get to interwar period, among women receiving doctorates from the Jagiellonian University, Jewish women are the largest numbers. There are some years that they are only Jewish women who receive PhDs. So you have this extraordinary leadership, and many women take it back to the communities that they serve later on. So let me take you to a few chapters to give you some examples. So Zahavit Stern's chapter, the first chapter in our book, focuses on the Ararat theater. This was a theater that was established in 1927 in Łódź by Moshe Broderson, who arrived in Poland from Moscow and became a very, very prominent artist, kind of at an intersection of several artistic circles. He was involved in Łódź with the Young Yiddish movement. I will show it in a moment as well. But he was also the director of the Ararat theater and the spiritus movens of the theater. He was also involved with the Haliastra as well in Warsaw, although he was, for the most part, they thought of him as too conservative, and that's really the story of Ararat is a fascinating one. So back to Łódź being this industrial center of Poland with the large working class, it drew artists who were interested precisely in these sorts of audiences. In fact, Łódź has a fascinating museum of art today, the collection that has started with artists themselves wanting to put on display works that were engaging with the spirit of the city, with its industrial layer, with the factories, with the simple people. So here is a theater that is trying to combine high art and lowbrow cabaret art, what is in Yiddish often referred to as Schund. Pulp, yes, Schund translates as pulp, correct? Now I'm putting Jeff Weidinger now. I'm sorry, I should have done it too. But anyway, there are. Putting on the spot, that was the word I was looking for. Okay, they were intersecting, they were building a theater that was an intersection of avant-garde art, of modernist art, of futurist art, at the same time as they were bringing in elements of cabaret, of everyday street life, the kind of folkloristic or Volksstimmung character that they thought would draw audiences of the blue-collar artists, blue-collar audiences. And they actually had some success in Łódź. They took it on the road. They did move to Warsaw ultimately in the 30s and had much better audiences there. But this is an example where you had art that was created directly, specifically for a blue-collar Jewish audience in a particular city, and that style was exported now to the capital. The second chapter in the book is by Justin Kami, focuses on an artist who was creative, Elkanan Vogler, who was writing poetry in Vilnius, in today's city of Vilnius, Polish Vilno, and Yiddish Vilna. And his poetry is a beautiful, beautiful example of this kind of rootedness that I was talking about. He engages the the Lithuanian landscape around Vilnius. He brings in nature as an interlocutor in his works, and he engages also in a way in a dialogue with Polish poets that who were writing about this region. For example, of course, Mickiewicz, and you will kind of see a number of correspondences there that come up in the analysis of this beautiful poetry. This is a chapter by Bożena Shellcross, and this chapter focuses on two protagonists, Irena Krzywicka, who was an activist. She was a writer, she was a journalist. She was very active working on women's issues. She was actually responsible for establishing a women's clinic, a clinic specifically for women's health in Warsaw. She was writing on this topic, and she was also living this. She was living in an open marriage with a sociologist, well-known sociologist, hence the name Krzywicki, and also had a lifelong relationship with Wojciech, who was also a spiritual partner. They were collaborating on many projects that were important to them. So here you have a woman who is very rebellious, and she buys land in Leśna Podkowa, a neighborhood that is still well known. It's now fairly easy to access from Warsaw, but it was a very posh neighborhood with very traditional-minded population, vacation spot, summer spot. The architecture there emulated the Polish manor style, and she commissions this Jewish architect whose name is Goldberg to build a glass house for her. So completely different architecture, and this is a disruption. It's not just her, the architecture is disruption, but her lifestyle and who she is and what she represents. So here you have, she's pushing against the center within Podkowa Leśna, but also there is a kind of a collision between this particular milieu of Podkowa Leśna and Warsaw progressive circles in here. Back to Łódź. I'm from Łódź, so all the roads lead to Łódź as far as I'm concerned. Here's Broderson. This is a Jankel Adler's portrait of Moshe Broderson. So again, the person from Ararat. And this was a journal that was published, short-lived journal that was published by Young Yiddish. They had a few publications, and there's some really fascinating images by artists from the Young Yiddish movement. So this was a group of artists that included also a couple of women who were working mostly in the new styles. Constructivism is important to them. Expressionism perhaps more than any other style. They have very close contact with Berlin expressionists. And they are all based in Łódź. And again, it is that particular nature of the city, the factories, and I think this, okay, great. You can see that some of the symbolism in this image. So you have a clock, which is of course modern time. You have the factory. Here is a lamp symbolizing learning. There is it's difficult to interpret what the letters may mean. Shtetl, Shabbat. It's the Black Shabbat is the particular Schwarzes Shabbos is the title of this publication, and then M, his name Moshe, Metropolis, Polish Manchester for Łódź. So that's a number of possibilities here to interpret it. So you can see that there are interpretations. The symbolism is of course, also Jewish symbolism in here. So you get a number of symbols that bring in the tradition and modernity, and also bring the culture of the city kind of oriented towards Jewishness and Jewish mysticism, and many of those images bring those elements together. Małgorzata Stolarska-Fronia, who authored this chapter, argues in there actually that the particular blend of modernity and mysticism that was embraced by Young Yiddish had impact on Berlin expressionist artists rather than the other way around. So this is an example again of a different relationship between the periphery and the center. I'm going to move quickly to leave time for questions. So this is a chapter by Naomi Zeidman, who focuses on Boris Yaakov girls' theater. So here you have an Orthodox Jewish movement where you have education for girls in an Orthodox setting, so they are educated without boys around them. But once they engage in theater, it raises all kind of fascinating issues, because now you have girls cross-dressing as boys, something that was the privilege the other way around. For example, in Purim Spiel, it was boys that would cross-dress as girls. You also have situations where their plays were so wonderful that boys would cross-dress and sneak into the place to be able to watch them. So that causes an outrage. There is a big debate about it that has been documented in the press. It's really fascinating. The tour of Braha Sefira, who was a Yemeni born Israeli Palestinian at the time singer, who married an Ashkenazi pianist, and they toured Europe together. And she came on a tour through the cities of Poland, and Magdalena Kozłowska is looking through this. A lot of reception documented in newspapers, in Yiddish language newspapers and Polish language newspapers, and she's looking through that the reception to understand how the audiences reacted to the perceived exoticism, how they understood themselves vis-a-vis Jews who lived in Palestine. So, okay, a few things about music. So this is a chapter by Sylwia Jakubczyk-Ślączka, who did extensive archival work in the archives of Southeast Poland and Western Ukraine to learn about musical practices of Jewish music societies in particular in the cities of this region. This article focuses on the city of Lvov or Lviv, and she looks at the kind of general trends in programming by the Jewish Music Society, starting with the earlier period when the preferences seem to be the kind of Germanic repertory, Austrian city, when she did in the period where she starts her work. This is still part of Galicia, the eastern province of the Austrian Empire, and you see it in the repertory of the concert on the left. By the time you get to the concert on the right, what you have is completely Jewish-oriented program, and these are composers who are interested in either mainstream European music languages without any specific Jewish tint, or in Jewish topics, or folkloristic Jewish themes in art music, and I will play something in a moment. In between, you have other phases where different kind of musical practices are tested. I will play for you in a moment something having to do with Jewish choirs and what kind of repertoires they did. And let me play this for you and then I will comment afterwards. So here's an example. If you look at this slide, Juliusz Wolfson is next to the last one on here. And this is from the same set. This is his setting of the song that here is titled Hochzeitslied. So here is an example of a choral program that I mentioned. These choral performances were happening starting from the 1920s, and initially it was very difficult to get this music performed in Lviv. The audiences did not want this music, and neither did the leadership of the Jewish Music Society. They wanted either that repertory, the Germanic repertory, or at some point, starting in the 20s, there's also a push to include more Polish art music. They are not interested in the folkloristic music that choral societies are performing. And Fajvyshys worked there for a short time, was unhappy, was pushed out, went to a few other places, finally settled in Łódź, and did some amazing work in Łódź. And his last chapter was actually in the Warsaw Ghetto. He ended up in the Warsaw Ghetto during the war and led children's choir there. So there's documentation of that, and there are some scholars who have done really. Julia Riegel did some amazing work on Fajvyshys' work during the last years. So I have studied Fajvyshys and I have tried to research him and I have written about him, and I never saw his face until last year. I finally found that photograph is in a ghetto fighter's house in Israel, and it was just an amazing thing to put a face to this. So I want to play for you, and this is the last example of this presentation. I want to play for you his arrangement of Hernoshein Meidele. This is a song that many of you probably have heard because it is really well known, performed often, and very often performed in a klezmer style. So you would, if you know that song, you will be surprised how different his setting is, but it is quite exquisite. So this is probably the first recording of this arrangement ever. And we were able to do it during the workshop that Nancy and I cooked up during that conversation at the dinner at the hotel. And we reached out to 4 colleagues who have been running Polish-Jewish workshop, Genevieve among them, and said we want to do a Polish-Jewish workshop on this topic. So we did, the workshop was fantastic, and the way we arranged it is people already had the chapters drafted and we read each other's chapters. So it was not a conference, but we are already workshopping the ideas, and we all decided we have so much interesting new stuff here, this needs to be a book. But one of the things that happened is the School of Music at Rutgers, where we held a workshop, worked with us, and the amazing Pat Gardner, who was leading the Rutgers choir, agreed to do a few of these pieces that have never been performed in modern times and never have been recorded. So we had all of this amazing music that needed home for the book. So there is a website, and how do I now get there to the website? I think I need to get out of the PowerPoint.
Even from the PowerPoint.
To do it from the PowerPoint, let's see. Okay, we can get there now. Liz knows better. We have it open already. There we go. So this is the website, and if you go to recordings, you will find links to all of the recordings. Each one of them has its own. You see there, this comes from a volume that was published in 1939 in Vilna, and you have information about everything, including Broderson's beautiful translation of the text that Mendelssohn used. So let me play this, and I will close with that. This is a beautiful recording, I think. Mendelssohn for Jewish
Voice
have a little time
Yeah,
for
question
questions.
for questions. If people do need to just next class.
Okay, so I have two questions. The first one is quick. I was wondering, sorry. Yeah, my name is Lilith. I'm a first-year student in the Mir's Kris program. So two questions. The first one was on Ararat. Being an Armenian, I just couldn't help to question the name, whether it has any connection at all, or like the Turkey area to
Which
Ararat.
name?
Ararat, the theater. Ararat.
Oh, thank you for the question. So it stands for Artistische Revue Theater, but yes, it does, because both meanings, it was, of course, an abbreviation, but like many of the other theaters, kind of middlebrow theaters, they are referred to as Kleinkunst. They have these biblical names, you know, that they have Azazel, for example, you know, Sabbation. I mean, they are just, so yes. So there was all kinds of conversation about, you know, this very lofty name for this kind of middlebrow theater that is doing this weird, you know, modern stuff. So yeah. So, by the way, the city of Lviv, where we just ended right now, was also had a very large Armenian community, and I think still has. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And then the second question, it's not formulated for myself either, but I'll try. So I think, and I might be wrong here, but I think in the Soviet era, that's where the centering the capital is starting. And then before that, I think the space is more like regional and has regional identities, and the regional cultures are, like, there are more regional centers. And I think, again, with Sovietization of the space, the capital is becoming more central, like the standardizations. Starting from the language to culture is happening in the capitals, and then the periphery is seen through the lens of the capital. And that period, I was wondering what the Polish experience was, like what was prior to 1930s. Was it more regional identity?
So I will now put on my hat of the Chopin scholar working in the 19th century, and I would say that even then the pull of the capital is really, really strong. And you are talking about the period when there is no sovereign Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a kind of a strong sense of Warsaw being the symbolic capital of Poland. Although, well, the previous capital of Poland, of course, Kraków was the capital of Poland before Warsaw. So there is that dual pull in terms of the symbolic sense of Polishness. So yes.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I think it's something different what's happening during Sovietization. I think it's perhaps a different process still. But I think some of it is our doing also, that we pay attention to the capital and we are not paying attention to those other centers, and that's what we are hoping to remedy here. So, yes.
I did notice on one of the slides it mentioned something about Galicia. I was wondering if there was any interplay of Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews in this area.
No. It's not the same as Galicia in Spain. No. That's a fair question, and it's the region of Austrian-controlled southern Poland and Ukraine. So southern Poland is western Ukraine. Yeah.
Good question. Thank you. My question is about differences. Sorry, I'm Mackenzie Pierce, musicology department. It's about differences among the genres. I think it's really interesting to think of this period as being regional, but I'm wondering if there are, for specific artistic practices, say music versus literature, cities that emerge more as centers than in others. In other words, is this kind of provincialization of Poland in this period really also grounded in specific artistic communities, or is it something more general and broad? I ask in part because I've done some work on the history of musicology in Poland, and for that, Warsaw is pretty irrelevant in until after
Oh,
the war.
absolutely. It's all in
Lviv,
Jagiellonian,
all
yeah.
Lviv.
It's Jachimecki, yeah.
Yeah, and then Krakow. So
Yeah.
those are historically important
Yeah.
because musicology is sort of born from Austria in that period. But are there kind of variances around the artistic communities we're talking about that might put certain...
So I will add to your work on the emergence of musicology that the other center that was not considered Poland at the time was Wrocław, Breslau, and actually the Warsaw collection after the war, when they were creating a sense of center, came from Breslau. I don't know if you know, but Lisa pulled it from Breslau, and they were very, very unhappy. Than Wrocław. So yeah, I keep getting an earful every time I go there. You know, Warsaw has our stuff, so. But anyway, I think so. There are some genres that are appear everywhere. The popular music genres, you know, the tango and foxtrot, just are everywhere. And everything can be turned into a tango, as we have seen. So there are particular styles that are associated with particular places. So Jung Yiddish, Jung Vilna, completely different approaches, completely different aesthetics, built linguistically on different practices, oriented in different directions. I would say that that Vilna artists are probably more oriented towards St. Petersburg, maybe Moscow to some degree as well, artistically. Jung Yiddish is oriented towards Berlin, and to some degree Paris as well. So yes, so there will be choices in styles, but what will come with it is particular genres, for example, as the way Ararat is employing cabaret genres or kind of hybrid genres in performance. I don't know, does that answer the question? Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Maybe I'll just ask if the extent to which there is a definable Polish Jewish culture in the periphery, as opposed to just a Central East European Jewish culture. So when they're looking to other influences in the towns or the cities even that you're looking at, are they more likely to be looking at what's going on in Kiev or Vienna, for that matter, or what's going on among Poles in their midst?
I think it's all of the above. I don't think there is one answer to that. So, for example, the Music Society in Lviv is they are kind of head in head with the Music Society that is led by Christian music lovers, and actually they sometimes also trade the concert halls and so forth. So the repertories and the genres and so forth overlap here very much, and I think the inspiration is local from also what's going on in the kind of highbrow Gentile community. So that's an example of what is going on locally. I'm thinking about other examples where, definitely anything that is happening in Krakow is very much in dialogue with the Gentile community in Krakow and what's going on in Poland. And the Jewish intelligentsia in Krakow express themselves mostly in Polish, and they are fluent in Polish language and Polish culture. And the chapter that I didn't get to talk about by Alicja Maślak is she's telling a story about the monument of Kazimierz the Great, the king of Poland that was purported to have officially invited Jews into Poland, and that monument, that community working on building that monument, which never was actually built, and there was a plaque that was put in its place, and it's still on the Wolnica Square in Kazimierz today. That plaque of the design of the of the monument. But this is, again, a dialogue with Polish history, with Polish-speaking community. Alicja Maślak-Maciejewska, I'm very sorry, Alicja. So here are examples where there are conversations with the communities, local communities, and the cultural Gentile leadership. The popular music genres are speaking to all of the communities. And sometimes they are translated, some of the songs are translated. We have recordings of Yiddish versions of the songs. They would have been very popular. But the Polish versions of the song were also popular with Yiddish-speaking audiences. So here you have complete kind of a collaboration. And you see it a lot in the movies, they are working together. And as Marcus Silver said, there would be along one street in which you had the Polish language theater, the Yiddish language Scala theater that has Shakespeare in Yiddish, and then you have Arara. They are all there, and they all go to the same cafe at the end of the day and hang out together and talk to each other, and they collaborate together. So.
Yes, I just had a question. I did notice that the book itself is actually from the University of Michigan Library.
Yes, it is.
Any
I
idea
chose it for a reason. Yes.
ended up here?
Yes, it is here. You have some amazing treasures here. So yeah, and I don't know of another copy of this book. So it's 2 volumes. And the arrangements in that book are just, that's definitely a master's thesis, maybe a doctoral dissertation there, just on that. Just the translation of this text, it is so stunning because he when he translates it, he also recontextualizes the imagery has nothing to do with what Goethe has in the original. Where murmurs and shadows bend in reverence, and he uses specific expression in Yiddish that references davening, the practices of Jewish prayer with the bending of the knees. He uses that in there, and then while branches whisper prayers, and it tefillah spike, and it is again a very very much embedded in Jewish religious practices. So he recontextualizes this pagan ritual, because this is Walpurgisnacht, and this is what Goethe has in here, into a kind of a sacred Jewish space. It's really 4 lines, but it's totally cool. Yes.
Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm from musicology. I'm curious, the musical examples you showed us in the presentation, if you could talk about how you came to those. And I am aware that New York Public Library has a huge Jewish music collection. I wonder how you discovered
How did I arrive at these examples? So the general idea was to show the breadth in this concert, to show the breadth of Jewish engagement with music making and the breadth of music that Jewish audiences would have been exposed to. So, for example, these are this is liturgical music, but liturgical music of Reform synagogues, which we typically think of when we think about Germany, maybe Austria with Sulzer, but we don't really think much about that in Poland. And this is Weiss was the cantor and artistic musical director of one of the 2 Jewish Reform communities in Warsaw at mid-19th century, before Warsaw Reform communities merged and moved to the famous Slomackie synagogue that was destroyed at the start of World War II. And then, the names of people like Kusowicki, Sirota come up as these big cantors. But he was actually probably trained in Breslau, it has been difficult to find information about his early years, but he this is synagogue, progressive synagogue music written in the 1850s. Next one was for the synagogue, progressive synagogue in Częstochowa. This is from a late 19th century collection. We wanted to honor the participation of Jewish virtuosi, piano virtuosi in particular, in the musical tradition of the time, both as performers, particularly as performers, but also as composers. And we chose Paula Schalitz's performance here. And then these are composers who engaged with new avant-garde languages. So two mazurkas, very much in the vein of Szymanowski's mazurkas, clearly inspired by those kind of modernist mazurkas by, they were both amateur musicians, but very, very deeply embedded in Kraków musical scene. Tanzmann, of course, you know, we wanted to have some popular music in the concert, so another one of songs to Włas's texts, an example of Jewish art song from early 20th century. Koffler, the first Polish composer to write in 12-tone idioms, so this is a dodecaphonic piece, and then a couple of choral works from the folkloristic inspiration here, and kind of adaptation of the mainstream European repertoire. So you see here that what we are trying to show is the range of musical styles that different communities engage with at different moment, and the different ways of music making as much as possible. The sources, asking people, looking in the libraries, writing to librarians, following names of artists that I thought might be interesting, and then poking around, looking whether, you know, WorldCat has them. You go through 15 different spellings because, of course, they are not standardized and so forth. And then, you know, sometimes you got a response. And then I had to present a buffet to the performers, because ultimately they have to embrace it. So, you know, what is possible? You know, I gave a whole bunch of stuff to Pat Gardner and said, what do you think you can do within the time that you have allowed? So now you go into practicalities, the time that you have available to you to prepare the chorus. So then he chooses the things that he thinks would work with the chorus, and that he has the time to rehearse. You know, we could have done an oratorio in Yiddish, but there's no time for that, yeah? And to prepare, and then also, you know, what performers, individual performers, can do in terms of their own technique. You know, we had this magnificent soprano, and she was mezzo-soprano actually, and you know, it has to fit her range. It has to fit her technique. So, you know, so I prefer to prepare the buffet and then kind of help the performers to have a variety. I don't know, does it answer your question? It was a major research project to pull this together. So there was a point when I was thinking, yeah, I want to write, you know, an article for the. Can't do both. I was doing that. That is my article. There's one more question.
Wait, I can also ask it later.
I think it's okay. Good.
It's
end on that one. Yeah.
You kind of mentioned this concept of here-ness or rootedness. I didn't quite get the word.
Doigkeit, yeah.
Super interesting, and I'm curious whether or not, do you just notice that in these studies of sort of peripheral urban spaces, do you see that more in those places, or is it also happening in the capitals? Because capitals sort of have this way of sort of, if you're from the capital, you identify with the entire country in some way, or the entire state, or in some way.
So this is actually something, this is a concept that writers of that era, some of the writers of that era themselves engage. And the one that perhaps most directly so is Friedman, who is advocating for this the Society of Knowing the Land, so kind of a parallel organization to a similar society, the Polish Society of Knowing the Land, and this is the Yiddish Society of Knowing the Land. And he's developing this concept of kind of rootedness in the land. And you have it in particular in Vogler's sense of poetry that is very much rooted in the place. But I think, you know, this is also a concept that is pushing against the Zionist movements and advocating for a sense of building a Jewish future on Jewish past in the place and a Jewish sense of grounding in the place. So yeah, so you know, in some of those chapters, you don't that is not kind of coming across as clearly, and other philosophy is driving it. But in others, that is the principle that is driving it.
Okay.
So.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Goldberg, for your, sorry, thought you would be in the screen for the recording. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering our questions.